The Ancient Wisdom by Annie Besant. Chapter 7, ReIncarnation. We are now in a position to study one of the pivotal doctrines of the ancient wisdom, the doctrine of reincarnation. Our view of it will be clearer and more in congruity with natural order if we look at it as a universal in principle and then consider the special case of the reincarnation of the human soul. In studying it, this special case is generally wrenched from its place in natural order and is considered as a dislocated fragment, greatly to its detriment. For all evolution consists of an evolving life, passing from form to form as it evolves, storing up in itself the experience gained through the forms. The reincarnation of the human soul is not the introduction of a new principle into evolution, but the adaptation of the universal principle to meet the conditions rendered necessary by the individualization of the continuously evolving life. Mr. Lafcadio Hearn, Hearn, has put this point well in considering the bearing of the idea of pre-existence on the scientific thought of the West. He says, and then there's a long quote which I'm going to read here. With the acceptance of the doctrine of evolution, old forms of thought crumbled. New ideas everywhere arose to take the place of worn-out dogmas, and we now have the spectacle of a general intellectual movement in directions strangely parallel with Oriental philosophy. The unprecedented rapidity and multiformity of the scientific progress during the last 50 years could not have failed to provoke an equally unprecedented intellectual quickening among the non-scientific. That the highest and most complex organisms have been developed from the lowest and simplest, that the single physical basis of life is the substance of the whole living world, that no line of separation can be drawn between the animal and the vegetable, that the difference between life and non-life is only a difference of degree, not of kind, that matter is not less incomprehensible than mind, while both are but varying manifestations of one and the same unknown reality. These have already become places of the new philosophy. After the first recognition, even by theology, of physical evolution, it was easy to predict that the recognition of psychical evolution could not be indefinitely delayed, for the barrier erected by old dogma to keep men from looking backward had been broken down. And today, for the student of scientific psychology, the idea of pre-existence passes out of the realm of theory into the realm of fact, proving the Buddhist explanation of the universal mystery quite as plausible as any other. None but very hasty thinkers, wrote the late Professor Huxley, were rejected on the ground of inherent absurdity. Like the doctrine of evolution itself, that of transmigration has its roots in the world of reality, and it may claim such support as the great argument from analogy is capable of supplying. And this quote was taken from Kokoro, Kokoro, Hints and Echoes of Japanese Inner Life by Lafcadio Hearn, 1896. Let us consider the monad of form, Atma Buddhi. In this monad, the outbreathed life of the Logos, lie hidden all the divine powers, but as we have seen, they are latent, not manifest, and functioning. They are to be gradually aroused by external impacts. it being of the very nature of life to vibrate and answer to vibrations that play upon it. As all possibilities of vibration exist in the monad, any vibration touching it will arouse its corresponding vibratory power, and in this way one force after another will pass from the latent to the active state. Herein lies the secret of evolution. The environmental acts on the form of the living creature. No, the environment acts on the form of the living creature, and all things, be it remembered, live. Let me start this sentence again. Oh my goodness. Herein lies the secret of evolution. The environment acts on the form of the living creature, and all things, be it remembered, live. And this action transmitted through the enveloping form to the life, the monad, within it, arouses responsive vibrations which thrill outward from the monad through the form, throwing its particles in turn into vibration and rearranging them into a shape corresponding or adapting to the initial impact. This is the action and reaction between the environment and the organism, which have been recognized by all biologists and which are considered by some as giving a sufficient mechanical explanation of evolution. Their patient and careful observation of these actions and reactions yields, however, no explanation as to why the organism should thus react to stimuli, and the ancient wisdom is needed to unveil the secret of evolution by pointing to the self, capital S, in the heart of all forms, the hidden mainspring of all the movements in nature. Having grasped this fundamental idea of a life containing the possibility of responding to every vibration that can reach it from the external universe, the actual responses being gradually drawn forth by the play upon it of external forces, the next fundamental idea to be grasped is that of the continuity of life and forms. Forms transmit their peculiarities to other forms that proceed from them, these forms being part of their own substance, separated off to lead an independent existence. By fission, by budding, by extrusion of germs, by development of the offspring within the maternal womb, a physical continuity is preserved, every new form being derived from a preceding form and reproducing its characteristics. Science groups find these facts under the name of the law of heredity, and its observations on the transmission of form are worthy of attention and are illuminative of the workings of nature in the phenomenal world. But it must be remembered that it applies only to the building of the physical body into which enter the materials provided by the parents. Her more hidden workings, those workings of life without which form could not be, have received no attention, not being susceptible to physical observation, and this gap can only be filled by the teachings of the ancient wisdom, given by those who of old used superphysical powers of observation, and verifiable gradually by every pupil who studies patiently in their schools, their capital T, their schools. There is a continuity of life as well as continuity of form, and it is the continuing life with ever more and more of its latent energies rendered active by the stimuli received through successive forms, which resumes into itself the experiences obtained by the encasings in form. For when the form perishes, the life has the record of those experiences in the increased energies aroused by them, and is ready to pour itself into the new forms derived from the old, carrying with it this accumulated store. While it was in the previous form, it played through it, adapting it to express each newly awakened energy. The form hands-on, these adaptations inwrought into the substance, to this separated part of itself that we speak of as its offspring, which being of its substance must needs have the peculiarities of that substance. The life pours itself into the offspring with all its awakened powers and molds it yet further, and so on and on. Modern science is proving more and more clearly that hereditary plays an ever decreasing part in the evolution of the higher creatures, that mental and moral qualities are not transmitted from parents to offspring, and that the higher the qualities, the more patent is this fact. The child of a genius is ofttimes a dolt. Commonplace parents give birth to a genius. A continuing substratum there must be in which mental and moral qualities inhere in order that they may increase. Else would nature, in this most important department of her work, show erratic, uncaused production instead of orderly continuity. On this science is dumb, but the ancient wisdom teaches that the continuing stratum is the monad, which is the receptacle of all results, the storehouse in which all experiences are garnered as increasingly active powers. These two principles, firmly grasped of the monad, with potentialities becoming powers and the continuity of life and form, we can proceed to study their workings out in detail, and we shall find that they solve many of the perplexing problems of modern science, as well as yet more heart-searching problems confronted by the philanthropist and the sage. Let us start by considering the monad as it is first subjected to the impacts of the formless levels of the mental plane, the very beginning of the evolution of form. Its first faint, responsive thrillings draw around it some of the matter of that plane, and we have the gradual evolution of the first elemental kingdom already mentioned. The great fundamental types of the monad are 7 in numbers, sometimes imaged as like the 7 colors of the solar spectrum, derived from the 3 primary. Each of these types has its own coloring of characteristics, and this coloring persists throughout the ionic cycle of its evolution, affecting the series of all living things that are animated by it. Now begins the process of subdivision in each of these types that will be carried on, subdividing and ever subdividing until the individual is reached. The current set up by the commencing outward-going energies of the monad to follow one line of evolution will suffice. The other 6 are like unto it in principle, but have but brief form life. Yet whatever experience can be gained through them is represented by an increasingly responsive life in the monad, who is the source and the cause. And as this responsive life consists of vibrations that are often incongruous with one another, a tendency towards separation is set up within the monad, the harmoniously vibrating forces grouping themselves together for, as it were, concerted action until various submonads, if the epithet may for a moment be allowed, are formed, unlike in their main characteristics, but differing in details like shades of the same color. These become, by impacts from the lower levels of the mental plane, the monads of the second elemental kingdom, belonging to the form region of that plane, and the process continues, the monad ever adding to its power to respond, each monad being the inspiring life of countless forms through which it receives vibrations, and as the forms disintegrate, constantly vivifying new forms, the process of subdivision also continues from the cause already described. Each monad thus continually incarnates itself in forms and garners within itself as awakened powers all the results obtained through the forms it animates. We may well regard these monads as the souls of groups of forms, and as evolution proceeds, these forms show more and more attributes, the attributes being the powers of the monadic group soul, manifested through the forms in which it is incarnated. The innumerable submonads of this second elemental kingdom presently reach a stage of evolution at which they begin to respond to the vibrations of astral matter, and they begin to act on the astral plane, becoming the monads of the third elemental kingdom, and repeating in this grosser world all the processes already accomplished on the mental plane. They become more and more numerous as monadic group souls, showing more and more diversity in detail, and the number of forms animated by each becoming less as the specialized characteristics become more and more marked. Meanwhile, it may be said in passing that the ever-flowing stream of life from the Logos supplies new monads of form on the higher levels, so that the evolution process continuously and as the more evolved monads incarnate in the lower worlds, their place is taken by the newly emerged monads in the higher. By this ever-repeated process of the reincarnation of the monads or monadic group souls in the astral world, their evolution proceeds until they are ready to respond to the impacts upon them from physical matter. When we remember that the ultimate atoms of each plane have their sphere walls composed of the coarsest matter of the plane immediately above it, it's easy to see how the monads become responsive to the impacts from one plane after another. When in the first elemental kingdom the monad had become accustomed to thrill responsively to the impacts of the matter of that plane, it would soon begin to answer to vibrations received through the coarsest forms of that matter from the matter of the plane next below. So, in its coating of matter that were the forms composed of the coarsest materials of the mental plane, it would become susceptible to vibrations of astral atomic matter, and when incarnated in forms of the coarsest astral matter, it would similarly become responsive to the impacts of atomic physical ether, the sphere walls of which are constituted of the grossest astral materials. Thus, the monad may be regarded as reaching the physical plane, and there it begins, or more accurately, all these monadic group souls begin to incarnate themselves in filmy physical forms, the etheric doubles of the future dense minerals of the physical world. Into these filmy forms, the nature spirits build the denser physical materials, and thus minerals of all kinds are formed, the most rigid vehicles in which the evolving life encloses itself, and through which the least of its powers can express themselves. Each monadic group soul has its own mineral expressions, and the mineral forms in which it is incarnated, and the specialization has now reached a high degree. These monadic group souls are sometimes called in their totality the mineral monad, or the monad incarnating in the mineral kingdom. From this time forward, the awakened energies of the monad play a less passive part in evolution. They begin to seek expression actively to some extent when once aroused into functioning, and to exercise a distinctly molding influence over the forms in which they are imprisoned. As they become too active for their mineral embodiment, the beginnings of the more plastic forms of the vegetable kingdom manifest themselves, the nature spirits aiding this evolution through the physical kingdoms. In the mineral kingdom, there had already been shown a tendency toward the definite organization of form, the laying down of certain lines along which growth proceeded. This tendency governs henceforth all the building of forms, and is the cause of the exquisite symmetry of natural objects, with which every observer is familiar. The monadic group souls of the vegetable kingdom undergo division and subdivision with increasing rapidity in consequence of this still greater variety of impacts to which they are subjected, the evolution of families, genera, and species being due to this invisible subdivision. When any genus is thus when any genus with its generic monad group soul is subjected to very varying conditions, i.e. when the forms connected with it receive very different impacts, a fresh tendency to subdivide is set up in the monad, and various species are evolved, each having its own specific monadic group soul. When nature is left to her own working, the process is slow, although the nature spirits do much toward the differentiation of species. But when man has been involved, and when he begins his artificial systems of cultivation, encouraging the play of one set of forces warding off another, and then this differentiation can be brought about with considerable rapidity, and specific differences are readily evolved. So long as actual division has not taken place in the monadic group soul, the subjection of the forms to similar influences may again eradicate the separative tendency. But when that division is completed, the new species are definitely and firmly established and are ready to set offshoots of their own. In some of the longer-lived members of the vegetable kingdom, the element of personality begins to manifest itself. The stability of the organism rendering possible this foreshadowing of individuality. With a tree living for scores of years, the recurrence of similar conditions causing similar impacts, the seasons ever returning year after year, the consecutive internal motions caused by them, the rising of the sap, the putting forth of the leaves, the touches of the wind, of the sunbeams, of the rain, all these outer influences with their rhythmical progression set up responsive thrillings in the monadic group soul, and as the sequence impresses itself by continual repetition, the recurrence of one leads to the dim expectation of its oft-repeated successor. Nature evolves no quality suddenly, and these are the first faint adumbrations of what will later be memory and anticipation. In the vegetable kingdom also appear the foreshadowings of sensation, evolving in its higher members to what the Western psychologist would term massive sensations of pleasure and discomfort. It must be remembered that the monad has drawn round itself materials of the planes through which it has descended, and hence is able to contact impacts from those planes, the strongest and most nearly allied to the grossest forms of matter, being the first to make themselves felt. Sunshine and the chill of its absence at last impress themselves on the monadic consciousness and its astral coating. thrown into faint vibrations, gives rise to the slight, massive kind of sensation spoken of. Rain and drought affecting the mechanical constitution of the form and its power to convey vibrations to the ensouling monad are another of the pairs of opposites, the play of which arouses the recognition of difference, which is the root alike of all sensation and later of all thought. Thus, by their repeated plant reincarnations, the monadic group souls in the vegetable kingdom evolve until those that ensoul the highest members of the kingdom are ready for the next step. This step carries them into the animal kingdom, and here they slowly evolve in their physical and astral vehicles in a very distinct personality, the animal being free to move about, subjects itself to a greater variety of conditions that can be experienced by the plant rooted to a single spot, and this variety, as ever, promotes differentiation. The monadic soul group, however, which animates a number of wild animals of the same species or subspecies, while it receives a great variety of impacts, since they are for the most part repeated continually and are shared by all the members of the group, differentiates but slowly. These impacts aid in the development of the physical and astral bodies, and through them, the monadic group soul gathers much experience. When the form of a member of the group perishes, the experience gathered through that form is accumulated in the monadic group soul and may be said to color it. The slightly increased life of the monadic group soul poured into all forms which compose this group shares among all the experience of the perished form, and in this way continually repeated experiences stored up in the monadic group soul appear as instincts, accumulated hereditary experiences in new forms. Countless birds having fallen prey to hawks, chicks just out of the egg will cower at the approach of one of the hereditary enemies, for the life that is incarnated in them knows the danger, and the innate instinct is the expression of its knowledge. In this way are formed the wonderful instincts that guard animals from innumerable habitual perils, while a new danger finds them unprepared and only bewilders them. An animal comes under the influence of man. As animals come under the influence of man, the nomadic group soul evolves with greatly increased rapidity, and from causes similar to those which affect plants under domestication, subdivision of the incarnating life is more readily brought about. Personality evolves and becomes more and more strongly marked. In the earlier stages, it may be said to be compound. A whole flock of wild creatures will act as though moved by a single personality. So completely are the forms dominated by the common soul, it, in turn, being affected by the impulses from the external world. Domesticated animals of the higher type, the elephant, the horse, the cat, the dog, show a more individualized personality. Two dogs, for instance, may act very differently under the impact of the same circumstances. The monadic group soul incarnates in a decreasing number of forms as it gradually approaches the point at which complete individualization has been reached. The desire body, or kamic vehicle, K-A-M-I-C, becomes considerably developed and persists for some time after the death of the physical body, leading to an independent existence in Kamaloka. At last, the decreasing numbers of forms animated by a monadic group soul comes down to unity, and it animates a succession of single forms, a condition differing from human reincarnation only by the absence of manas, M-A-N-A-S, with its causal and mental bodies. The mental body brought down by the monadic group soul begins to be susceptible to impacts from the mental plane, and the animal is then ready to receive the third great outpouring of the life of the Logos. The tabernacle is ready for the reception of the human monad. And I'm going to pause here. This is about the middle of this chapter on reincarnation. And it sounds like she's going to go into human reincarnation and how all that works. But that was just fascinating, I found, about how animals reincarnate and how they evolve. Wow. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that, and till soon.